Good afternoon and welcome. Coach Luca here, the Reflective Coach podcast. In this episode, traditional session planning. Within this episode, I'm just going to talk through some traditional sessions, how they would look, how you would frame them, how to structure them, give you some ideas, some sort of guidance as to how you will plan your structure and your sessions, especially for new coaches who are coming through or parents who've been asked to step up and take lead of a team. Just some session planning guidance is beneficial, and it's not always the easiest thing sort of to think of how your session's going to look or how you'd expect it to run. So here's just some tips and guidance on a traditional session plan. It's something that I use quite often. It works well for me. The players enjoy it. They're really well structured sessions. They got good transitions. There's not too much to them, so you're not expected to plan an academy session or to make the next Premier League team out of these sessions. But these sessions could benefit you at under 7s, 8s, 9s, 10s, 11s. They're really nice and simple. That you could use them for 5-minute planning. Sometimes that's what I use them for. 5-minute plans. I'll quickly go through, not too much detail if I just need to plan a session that I've been asked to take. And for me, these are really good guidance. It doesn't have to be whole part whole or a carousel kind of session. You don't have to get too much detail there. We're not made of abundance of time, and especially if we've got a number of sessions or if we're new, we don't have the time to sit down planning hundreds of sessions into detail. So traditional session planning and using these in 5-minute session plans really help. And I just really wanted to give some insights and some support, how to plan a traditional session, and certainly support experienced coaches that I've worked with, who have been parents who have come on board as coaches, and who have set out and have taken their own sessions, and having guidance like this would be really beneficial. So I thought I'd share it out there with everyone else. I'm not giving you secrets or things that haven't been explored before, but just some guidance and some helpful tips to help you plan your sessions can be really beneficial. So for example, this is a traditional session plan. You have your arrival activity, your warm-up, your main exercise, your progression and transition, a small-sided game, and a cool-down. Now, for some coaches, just having a straight indoor warm-up, indoor main exercise, and then a game is a typical session plan for them and what works, especially within an hour session. But for me, this works on an hour period as well. There's a lot to get in. But I think having an arrival activity for when your players arrive is really beneficial. Just get that contact between them, that communication, get them just doing 1-2 passing, get them working with the ball, giving the session some structure and organisation, especially if you have new players arriving who already looks organised, and it gives you time to speak to parents and other key stakeholders. It allows you to move straight into a warm-up, and then it gives you that great transition between the arrival activity and warm-up. Some people might use the arrival activity as the warm-up, but for me, I like to get players in small pairs. As soon as they arrive, they're passing, gives you time to speak to the assistant coach, feedback on anything that we need to talk about, plan, give insights into how the session's framed and what it's going to look like, and then we go straight to a warm-up, which gives us a structure, and it allows my assistant coach then to take the warm-up if I need to, and then I can go back to the main exercise. Then we can progress and transition, then we go into an SSG, and then we have a little cool down at the end where we debrief and recap and give some information ahead of a game. For example, if we're training on Saturday and this is how our session looks, and we have a game on Sunday, then we'll use a call down just to give some feedback and some information for the game ahead of tomorrow. So the arrival activity, the purpose of setting an arrival activity is to ensure players have something to do as soon as they arrive. Some ideas such as passing activities in small pairs or small groups, a shooting exercise, so already your goalkeepers are getting warmed up, they're involved in it. It allows some shots to be taken, and that energy and players just love to shoot and score goals, so it can take some of that energy out of them as soon as they arrive and just get that out of their system so they can be focused on a session. Or sometimes you could start backwards and start with an SSG. You could use that as a whole whole session, but starting off with an SSG sometimes just gets the boys and girls into a game, gets them organised. They can take leadership and ownership over it, and it allows then you to focus straight into your warm up then, or you could evade a warm up by starting off with an SSG and going straight into your main part of your session on the back of that SSG, as then you can already highlight. I don't like to start with an SSG too often. I feel that the players use too much energy in this, and an SSG is something that should be worked towards unless I plan for a whole session. But I do utilise that if I've got a lot of information to deliver, and I want to rebuild a session in terms of what I want to focus on with a lot of objectives and progressions in there. So a whole works in terms of that. So I don't tend to start with SSG. I like to try and start with passing activities. So the benefits of this is it allows you to finish setting up. Players can start communicating, develop player relationships, develop players' well-being. For example, if they're shooting and they enjoy shooting, or automatically they've come on an arrival activity, they're having fun, they're getting lots of shots in, and already their happiness is spurred before you've even started off the rest of the session. Sometimes that can be difficult for players who just want to shoot, because as soon as you say, right, we're going to go into a warm-up and then we're going to go on the main technical part of this session, which is going to be working on passing and moving and in and out of possession, for example, a player who just wants to shoot is going to be like, oh, great, and then they could hit a lull. But that's just for you to manage as a coach and be aware of. But it might improve their well-being if they're coming in already doing that shooting, if it's already limited within the session as such. So if you plan the session on a lot of stoppages, a lot of information, a lot of in and out of possession principles with objectives and that feedback you want to give them, just getting that shooting at the start of it could really, make them happy and really, get them on the shooting if you haven't done too much. And ensures session organisation, ensures session transition, and ensures player touches before the session even starts. So again, if you're looking in and out and you're stopping it, you're focusing on giving a lot of information, then passing and 1-2s and shooting can get lots of different touches going as soon as you need to. Sometimes having an arrival activity, so for goalkeepers to take shots at each other, or maybe both goalkeepers are in net with 1 or 2 attacking players while the rest are doing an arrival activity of 1-2 passing, can be really beneficial to the squad and your organisation, especially on a match day, for example. This is how I'd expect my players to arrive: the goalkeepers and 1 attacking player, or 2 attacking players, 1 to feed the ball across and 1 to shoot, for example, and they can switch it up. And the goalkeepers to get some shot stopping involved while the rest of the players are doing 1-2 passing before we all then get back together for our warm-up before the game really works for me. So arrival activity works for your traditional session planning, and it works for your SSG. Now, warm-ups. The purpose of a warm-up is to prevent injuries. Warm-ups are less relevant for under 12s in terms of there could be a lot of case study and information related to that, and a lot of theory backed up to it. But when we're looking at it as such as, they're less relevant for under 12s, then this is the kind of guidance that we've been given from a doctor who's working very closely with Sport England, and we feel that warm-ups are less relevant, but we keep them as part of our sessions to give that organisation, to give that expectation, to look at warm-ups, what our dynamic and static stretching looks like, and we look at more dynamics, so movement stretching, and this relates to how we cool down as well. So really helps build some good life lessons for the long term as well. So we keep it as part of our sessions, but we don't have too much focus on a warm-up as such under 12s. And mostly under 12s you want to focus on lots of little fun games, dynamic movements such as foxes and tails, stuck in the mud, tag, defensive line, etc. And these get the players moving around. There's lots of interaction. It gives good organisation. There's lots of fun. There's high energy. It's dynamic. It takes away from your very traditional, let's do some laps, let's get down and do touches, and it creates that fun. And it doesn't focus too much on a real disciplined warm up. It just transitions from that arrival into that fun warm up. And some of the benefits of that, for example, allows players to take organisation and leadership of the warm up. Players can start communicating, develop player relationships, develop player well-being, ensure session organisation, ensure session transition, and prevent injury. And then we can go straight into a main exercise. So the purpose of a main exercise is focused around your session objectives, which could be a reflection of your previous game or develops from your last training session. For example, here is an idea: specific and non-specific practices. So a specific is, you're in and out of possession principles, and how you would look at players working in a shape of, i.e., let's say a 3-3-3-1. If you're playing 7-a-side, with under 9s or under 10s. And that would be your specific session. Or you'd have non-specific, where you'd look at less positioning and you'd look at more technical. And you might look at, crossing and finishing, which is, you're still giving that specific information, but it's non-specific in terms of you might not use as many positions. You just want to focus on crossing and finishing. You're just having lots of energy, lots of shots. Goalkeepers are involved. You don't want to focus on, where a player would be if the ball was across to this side. You might mention it, but you're not going to have too many positions if you just have a technical session focused around shooting and finishing, which could be quite general, for example. Now, the benefits of this is transitions and reflections from previous training sessions and games. Prepare for games ahead. Focus on specific pillar for player development, i.e. tactical, physical, or psychosocial, or a combination of the pillars. It's easily organised and can even be delivered by assistant coaches. Now, you could have a specific session which you focused on a week before, and now you have a coach who doesn't like the lead, or is quite happy being the assistant coach, or is just in to support you, but you're not there, or you want them to lead on this main part of the exercise, and it's not too technical or too organised or too specific for them to deliver, which allows you to just observe the players and look at how you need to improve and what information you're feeding back and how to build on for next week, or for whatever your program cycle is. But your assistant coach could deliver a shooting and practicing finishing, which is non-specific and quite fun, and allows you just to observe who your best finishers are and how the goalkeepers would react, for example. Now, progressions and transitions, some coaches might drop this element as such, and they might just have an arrival, warm up, and then they just go into their, main part of the session, then SSG, and then it's, home time as such. But for me, I always like to have that progression and transition from the main exercise into, this bit then before the SSG. And the purpose of transitioning or progressing the main exercise is to continue building your session to further challenge your players. So again, specific and non-specific practices. If I was doing a specific practice in a 4-2-3-1 in possession versus a 4-3-3 out of possession, for example, and that was my main part of the exercise, then I would maybe progress this in terms of both teams would swap. So then the 4-2-3-1 would have what the 4-3-3 were doing, and vice versa. So then that would be a progression and transition, etc. Transition it so both teams get the understanding what it would look like in and out of possession, and how it would look like in those shapes before we transition then into our SSG, which gives it a more holistic approach, especially gives us that real understanding for the players and what players might fit well where, and it works really well a transition as such. Or for example, if I was going really basic with under 8s, I'd have a non-specific practice of, let's say, the objective of the session is regaining possession. And the whole point is lots of pressing, tackling, recovery positions. Once we lose the ball, what do we do? Lots of those questions. And then I transition that into, right, how would this look in a bigger area or in a smaller area? Or what would happen if we have an overload and underload? And then start getting that little bit more technical information in before going into the SSG. And it just builds on that information and really, helps you build on what your objectives are and attain, your objectives, and really recap on what your main activity of session was, and then prepares the players for an SSG, so it works really well. So some of the benefits of this is to further develop players who are excelling, progression towards your full coaching program, can further focus on specific pillars, i.e. such as player development of tactical, physical, psychosocial, or a combination of the pillars, involvement of coaches, of assistant coaches, and delivery from assistant coach. And then you can go into your SSG. So small-sided games, the purpose of an SSG is to observe and evaluate to as to whether your players have attained the session objectives. So again, if you've spent a big chunk of that session focusing on a main activity, and it was recovery, when out of possession, and how you would regain that, um, generally. Um, how would this look in an SSG? And the players really understood your main aspect, your main objective, your main information, everything that you've given them within the main exercise. And how does this look in an SSG? Or has it just gone to pot as such, and everything that you've worked on has just gone out of the window? Those who have recapped it and regained it in the SSG have really understood your session objectives, and there's nothing wrong with repeating the same session a week after and then using that transition just to build on something else, or starting off with an SSG and then working backwards into the main aspect of your session that you delivered this week, or just making that one or two tweaks. There was a time, from how I've reflected on what I've done as part of my coaching journey, I found at times to have stimulating programs where, I've had 6 weeks with a team, and we've had, a total of 12 sessions where we've trained twice a week. But the main session of the week, I would change it every week to build around what I wanted to do. So for example, I might have 2 weeks on shooting, so we train on a Wednesday, and both those Wednesdays would be very different sessions but focused around shooting, and it works really well because the session a week after relates to what we've done a week before, but it's stimulating, it's changed. It gives the players a lot of fun, especially if they haven't enjoyed the week before, or if there's players who haven't excelled the week before, or if they're players who have excelled. It just gives that different dynamic the week after, and those further challenges. And at times I've worked with other groups where I might repeat the same session 3 weeks in a row because I really want to build on, and I really want to capture these session objectives, and I might just make these transitions, that transitional slot in weeks 1, 2, and 3 slightly different, but the main core of that session was absolutely the same. And that's because I really wanted to build on it. And sometimes when you have less technical players, repeating the same session is really, really beneficial for them to take away that information, to keep recapping, to keep rebuilding, to keep developing them technically. So repeating sessions, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. You just don't want to repeat it 100 times in a row. There's times when I've done a session at under 9s, and then we've done the exact same session at under 10s, and suddenly when I say boys, I reflect on my team because it's made of boys. The year after, they've gone, oh, we've done this before, coach, and they're like, yeah, great, we know what to do, and then they've repeated it and they've excelled at it and they've done really well, and it's been great to see that progression in that year period. Sometimes I might make those tweaks to make it a little bit more challenging and stimulating as they've got older. I might use a bigger space, for example, because they might need more space to have movement with the ball, or recovery runs, and how I want that to look relating to our SSG, for example. So it works really well. You just need to understand when it works and when it doesn't. And there's nothing wrong with repeating sessions. Cooldowns. The purpose of a cooldown can be to recap session objectives, technical points, and information, as well as to prevent injury. For example, there could be slow cooldowns such as static stretches, less intensity, just having a walk back and forth the pitch a couple of times. You might walk up to the halfway line, you might just get the group in a little circle, just stretch it out, and then as they're doing that, you feed back and give that information to them, which is really beneficial, and continue to recap and build on your session. The benefits of this is to prevent player injury, recapture technical points and information from the session, beneficial for younger players more so than warm-ups, easily organised and can even be delivered by assistant coaches, can be player led at the end. So whilst you could transition because you've got that hour slot, you need to be off the 3G, for example, or you need to be off the pitch because the under 12s are coming on, or another group, whatever, just as they're cooling down and just having that downtime, your assistant coach could pack up while you do that cool down, or you both could pack up while the players are cooling down. And then you can just quickly recap with your players before you leave, or you quickly allow them to cool down on the side of the pitch while you get off the pitch, and then you recap before you leave, depending on what space is available, etc. But I always like to try and get a cool down in, talk to my players. For me, a warm up might be player led. So rival activity will be directed by me. Automatically, 1 or 2 players start to turn up early. They'll start passing with the ball, and suddenly every other player starts following suit. And then it allows me to have that observation of who's going to work hard that session. And then we move into a warm-up, which is, a warm-up can be player-led as well. And then a cool down at the end will be mostly, coach led, because we want to give that feedback, that terminal feedback at the end of our sessions. So a typical session plan, for example, if I had an hour with 15 players who are under 12s on a 4G surface, my arrival activity would be 6 o'clock to 6:05, including pre-session. So if I was able to get on the 4G a little bit earlier, then it would just mean those players would have that extra time. And as soon as they've arrived and they're there, they're passing in pairs, they're having those 1-2s, they're talking. So 6 to 6:05, and then 6:05 to 6:15, quick warm up. Might have a little quick game of stuck in the mud, for example, and we'll use the ball in terms of this. Then we'll have 6:20 to 6:30, so 10 minutes of exercise 1. Sometimes we might just want 10 minutes to work on a shooting exercise, because we didn't do so well at our shooting on Sunday, for example. And then I would progress that between 6:30 and 6:40. So I've got a nice 20-minute period there. And even though I might have had that 5-minute transition between 6:15 and 6:20, if I'm quick enough, then I can gain some extra minutes in there. And some people might question, 10 minutes just for your main exercise, what can you get out of that? How much you need to? Well, you could work in 2 4-minute blocks and have 2 minutes where you give terminal feedback, a minute either way, or you could work in 2 3-minute blocks of high intensity, and then you could really progress that into 2 4-minute blocks in that transition, but you're getting 20 minutes of high intensity work there, which can be really stimulating over a period of weeks for certainly younger players. And automatically then you're giving that terminal feedback, that crucial information. They've had lots of touches from the arrival activity, they're having fun in a warm-up, they're learning lots from the exercise and progression. Then they're moving into an SSG, which gives you lots of observation time, and it allows you to have that evaluation of whether the session objective has been achieved, and it allows them to have fun in the SSG. And then that cool down as well, so within an hour you're capturing a lot. I've seen a lot of coaches where players just turn up, they do a bit of a warm-up, then they might just go into a bit of an exercise such as passing and shooting, SSG, and then it's home time. And sometimes there's nothing wrong with that, especially if you haven't got the space, or you haven't got the equipment, or too many of the players. And sometimes you might have this session where you've planned it out to detail like this, and then you might just strip it back into, all right, we'll do a quick warm-up with the boys, then we'll just do an exercise on shooting and finishing, then we'll go into a game, and then we'll go, because you might not have a game coming up, or there's you're in summer and you don't want high intensity or too much information or feedback. You might just want to have contact time with the group because of their technical ability, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just giving you an idea of what a typical session plan could look like, how it's beneficial to you. Give you some insights, and then you could really adapt and build on it, or you could strip it back again because you haven't had the amount of players which you expected to turn up. But it's just to give you guidance and give you this could be done over 5 minutes. Right, I got 1 2 3 4 5 6 areas there. Okay, first 2 are given: arrival, passing. Oh, then we got cool down, got an SSG in there. Oh, right, I might just do a game for a warm-up such as Foxes and Tails. I'm going to drop the progression there maybe for this week and spend a little bit longer working on shooting and just have a lot of technical work with the lesser technical players, because we split the group into 2. And then I'm away. And you might be able to do that as an assistant coach as well, because the main coach is asked to split the group into 2. And sometimes if you're just the assistant coach and you're there to support more than deliver, and sometimes it can be thrown on you, then just having a short 5-minute session plan, which is quite easily planned, can be really beneficial. But there's just some insights there, how a typical session plan, a traditional session plan would look. It works really well, it's beneficial to players, gives you lots of organisation, lots of opportunities of contact time in there, and then that's how it would look. But that's just some hints and tips again, and more support for coaches. Take it how you will. Everyone's session plan is different. Everyone's session plan is what works for them. As much as you go on coaching courses and this is the typical way to do things, and you get assessed on certain ways, you find out what works for you in terms of your players, your group, your team, the way you like to deliver. You might not have an arrival activity because you don't it doesn't work for you, or you haven't got the time, and then gradually it just becomes phased out. But when I first started out, I never planned for an arrival activity. I always planned for a warm-up, then into an exercise, then into an SSG. But as I've evolved and grown and learned as a coach, You know, this is how my typical sessions look. And then I sort of look at, whole part holes that work for me then. But this is the kind of session that works for me. Again, thank you for your time. You can find me on Twitter, the Reflective Coach Podcast, Coach Luca. You can find me on LinkedIn, Spotify, and YouTube. Please enjoy everything that is out there. If you'd like these slides shared, I'm quite willing to share them. Please drop me a subscribe, like, and a comment. Take care. Thank you very much. Coach Luca.